Retired Admiral Ihor Voronchenko served as Inspector General of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine from 2020 to 2025. Andy served as acting commander of the Naval Forces of Ukraine and an Army Division commander in the 2014 conflict, the one in which Vladimir Putin invaded Crimea and went on to annex it. Throughout his 39-year military career, he served in assignments in Crimea, Germany, and Belarus, and held various positions in the National Guard, including commanding officer of the 7th National Guard Division. He retired in January 2025. Retired Colonel Andy Bain is executive director of Ukrainian Freedom Fund in Kyiv. He retired as a colonel from the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve and has lived and worked in Kyiv since 1992. They're both with us, as is FDD's own retired Admiral Mark Montgomery, recently returned from yet another visit to Ukraine. I'm eager to hear from them on the current state of the war that Russia has been waging against Ukraine, what the U.S. and Europe are and are not doing, and where they think the conflict is likely to go over the months ahead. I'm Cliff May, and I'm glad you're joining us too, here on Foreign Policy. Admiral Voronchenko, you served as the Inspector General of Ukraine's Ministry of Defense for nearly 4 years. From your perspective as the former Inspector General, how is the war going today? What's the state of the war?
So, as you know, our strategic objectives remain the same. Putin is still going through all the problems that he can go through to capture our territory and people. So, on the operational level, the front line is frozen. Because what they do now, they are going through the land, but it takes them like 3 or 4 kilometers. And of course, it's not worth all the people they lose.
Yeah. They're losing a lot of people per square kilometer.
So they probably just don't value people. It's in their blood. It's in their genetical code, and that's probably their mentality. And now that's a good environment for Putin to do whatever he wants to do.
З перших днів війни наш весь народ був мотивований.
From the first day of war, all the nation was very motivated, and we still are very motivated. Our nation stood up for our land from the very beginning, and all of us, little kids and old men.
Другий фактор, я полягаю як військовий, то
I also believe that there was a factor that Russia miscounted their capabilities and underestimated our capabilities. And they also didn't work well with logistics for themselves. And of course, the most important thing was how they tortured our people, and that was the biggest negative thing they did. And one thing about Russian preparation to war, so we got maps from them, and they were from 1983. And as a military, there's a question for me: how was that preparation?
І тоді ми зрозуміли, що такий ж він і не страшний цей ворог.
And then we realized that we can fight on our terms too, even though we're a smaller country than they are. We still can stand for our identity and our territory and show them everything we can do.
Другі роки війна йшла практично.
Then we were fighting using conventional weapons, and then, of course, drones changed it
Весь
all.
характер збройної боротьби. Як такової лінії бойового зіткнення.
And now we don't have a physical line on the map, the front line. We have zones like kill zone and gray zone, and they're all online, and we are always watching those zones. And this war is totally different from all the other wars we've had. So,
Але ж ворог підступний.
and our enemy is very coward and unpredictable, and they still violate conventions. They are terrorists now, and they are still terrorizing our civilians, and that's why we are so worried.
І це дуже нас хвилює. Щоденно звучать сигнали тривоги, щоденно ворог атакує
There
дронами.
are air alerts every day in our country. There are drones and missiles attacks, and they hit residential buildings, life support buildings. And just yesterday in Kharkiv, they hit the missile hit the hospital.
Цілий госпіталь. І, до речі,
And by the way, 2 years ago, the drone hit the house where I live, but the upper floor. And this house is right next to U.S. Embassy in Kyiv.
You commanded Ukrainian forces during the 2014 conflict when Russia seized Crimea. I'm curious to know, were Ukrainian forces prepared for that invasion?
операція тоді була приготовлена дуже ретельно.
I still often think about that, and that operation was definitely pre-planned accurately, and they worked on their concealment, and we had some period of time to work on the challenges that operation brought us.
На той виклик. Деякі частини були готові.
Some units were already prepared. We had some preventive actions, but we didn't receive an order before that to prepare better, and we didn't receive reinforcement right before that.
Напередодні в Крим.
Did the Russians try to get you to defect during the takeover of Crimea?
І не раз.
Not one.
Я казав і кажу, росіяни, вони
They
живуть по іншим
actually
правилам.
offered me more than once.
Інша свідомість. У них
You know, Russians have their rules. They have different consciousness. They have different methods of communications with the enemy. And they learned us all. They learned all the vulnerabilities of Ukrainian generals, of Ukrainian officers.
військових діячів, коли був на території Криму. Вони мені
So
пропонували
they actually offered me apartment in Rostov. They offered me a position of 3-star general, but of course I told them I'm Ukrainian and I'm gonna stay here till the end.
служити Україні, але ж не вам.
This week, 20 hostages held for 2 years by Hamas were released back to Israel. It's a wonderful thing. We're all celebrating that. But I think it's important to remind people that there are Ukrainian children, thousands of them. I've heard some reports up to 30,000, who are essentially hostages now in Russia, being brainwashed, being told they're not Ukrainian, being told to speak Russian. I know Melania Trump is concerned with this. I think she has freed 8 of them, but 8 out of thousands? I just think it's worth just spending a few seconds on this and reminding people of this.
Я дуже
I'm
вдячний.
very grateful to the First Lady that she is doing that and that she released some children that were captured by Russia. And I also hope that all of them will be released and will come back home.
Переміщення дітей.
And they're kidnapping children and militarizing them, and that's a part of the program they have in their brains.
У цих правителів.
Have you seen all these organizations? They create young army cadets, starting with the small little children, and that's definitely not normal for a country to do that.
Матері просто ростуться уже підготовлені зомбі.
They prepare zombies that will then be able to go to the front and kill people and die for the side.
Ну і можемо поділитися, до речі, вже своїм досвідом з партнерами, ті, які
And of course, we can even share our experience with our partners now, and they can learn their lessons for the future if needed from us.
Spasiba, we're done. Very good.
Дякую.
Well done. Monty, maybe start. You're recently back. What are your impressions from over there this time around?
So consistent with in the summer when I came back, I think that I still think Ukraine's societal resilience is strong. I don't think they'll lose. I think that there's a difference between not losing and winning. I think that, I don't, in my mind's eye, I can't see how they recapture Crimea without a dramatic change in Russia, things like that. But I'm also convinced that if President Trump wants to back a winner, and I know he likes to back winners, and if he wants to keep his streak of Nobel Prize, earning achievements going, bringing pressure on Vladimir Putin at this point is the right thing to do. You and I have talked about different ways he can do it. He's starting to surface some in his own mind. President Trump is. But the bottom line is it would benefit Ukraine greatly. It would benefit democracy in general if President Trump were to now step back and really bring the pressure down on President Putin. But my visit, my take there, I don't live there near as much as Andy. But I still believe that the Ukraine has a societal resilience that's necessary to fight off Putin's aggression.
Yeah, and I want your impressions on this too. But one quick question here: I just wonder, maybe this is being hopeful, that President Trump just won. I think we can all agree a victory in the Middle East. I think he deserves a lot of credit for what just happened. But it was a victory achieved. Peace through strength. It was a victory achieved because the shadow of military power, to quote George Shultz, hung over the bargaining table, hung over Qatar when he twisted their arms and said, now is the time, now or never, you will tell Hamas to release the hostages. He made that case to Turkey. I don't think Turkey wanted to do that, but they did. Because I suspect he said, our relationship depends on your being on my side on this one. Yeah, I'm wondering if he isn't learning from this that, okay, it's not simply, I'm sure Putin wants peace. We all want peace. I just got to talk to him about peace, that there's going to have to be the shadow of military power, at least in terms of the weaponry that and we're going to talk more about that he will give to Ukraine or sell through NATO, whatever. I don't care about the arrangements.
Yeah. So yes, I think that he learned from watching Israel pound Iran and then jumping in on it. And declaring victory.
And pound Qatar, too. Even though they missed their target, I think the attention was concentrated on Israeli abilities in the Gulf states. John Shands has written about this.
It's a topic for a different discussion.
Okay,
I disagree with John on that.
Okay.
I have friends that live in Qatar.
Yeah.
U.S. military officials and their families.
Well, they weren't going to hit them. They know they're pretty good at targeting.
Did they hit the target?
They hit the right building. They just didn't hit the right room.
Exactly.
I think a lot of iPhones have to be replaced now.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'll say is back on President Trump. President Trump did learn some important lessons here on America is the indispensable power. We're the strongest nation, but we get our way on a case when you're dealing with autocracy. When you deal with democracies, you can talk them to the right answer. When you're dealing with autocracies, you have to walk them to the right answer. And walking Vladimir Putin to the right answer means pressure. And that pressure's got to be economic or military, or both. And I think that's what's in order.
Okay. All right, Colonel Bain, talk about the situation. You've been watching this for a long time. You're feeling more optimistic? Were you more pessimistic?
Well, I think the dynamic is that the Ukrainians can't win. They see a loss for a lot of the leadership and a lot of the elite as existential. They think the Russians want to eliminate Ukrainianism, anything Ukrainian.
Let's understand, it's not the same. Iran wants to exterminate the Israelis. I think that Putin wants to subjugate the Ukrainians. He wants to get rid of the idea of a Ukrainian nation state, a Ukrainian culture, and even Ukrainian language, right?
I mean, he would exterminate leading Ukrainians. We had several people we helped evacuate during the invasion who were targeted by the Russians for assassination, and we got them out to safe areas.
Well, Zelensky was targeted, right? The president.
Well, I think he was targeted, but there are a number of civil society leaders or military leaders who they had. I have a friend; he's a Navy captain who was offered 5 times increase in salary to go over to the Russian Navy at the outset of the war. He declined it. And later, his house was invaded and booby-trapped when he.
The price of turning them down is we're going to kill you. You can come over and we'll give you a reward, or we can kill you.
And he was
whatever you want.
outspoken. He was U.S. trained, so they knew he was an enemy. And we work with him now, and he's certainly not a guy the Russians want walking around. So I think a lot of the Ukrainians understand that economic slavery is the cost of is the bare minimum cost of losing the war. But I also think, from the third day of the war, I didn't see the Russians being able to win this. The Russian military legacy is so overblown, and Americans, we grew up with this the threat of the Soviet military power. But if you look at Russian military history, they lost in Georgia, they lost in Afghanistan, they lost in Finland, they lost in Japan. World War II, they only won because of the Lend-Lease. And a lot of allies.
They lost to Japan even longer ago. Although Finland, well, I guess they lost. They got 10% of Finnish land, but
they got it handed to them in Finland.
And 1939 talking about.
And so you look at how they performed on the battlefield, and they performed terribly. The third day of the war, they tried to do a raid, landing a Tupolev 128 with a company of airborne soldiers on the airfield south of Kyiv. And you looked at the video footage of it, and you realized they did their raid planning in Rambo land. It was just ridiculous. They got shot out of the sky. No Americans would even think of trying to conduct what they did. And you realize how piss poor their planning, excuse my language, how poor their planning is in their inability to do things. And then you saw the 40-kilometer logistics train get blown up. I mean, these are unthinkable in U.S. terms. Mm-hmm. And then you see them unable, they're talking about this massive offensive they've got going. At the current rate of advance, it would take them 170 years and 70 million casualties in order to take all of Ukraine. So militarily, they're terrible. They have rockets, they have air threat, they have nukes. And those are the things that keep people at bay.
So to what extent, either of you can answer this, do you think, I know that you got to speculate, that Putin now understands I don't have the military I thought I did. My military can't do what I want to do. I better come up with a plan B.
The Ukrainians have the same military legacy. And that's one of the things that the Ukrainian Freedom Fund is overcoming is we're transitioning them to Western thinking, the Western way of warfare, where there's dialogue and discussion and planning and focus on mission command and commander's intent. So that people actually are not just taking orders and doing what they're told and not taking initiative, which is a huge factor. And when the units we've trained see a reduction of 30% or more casualties in their operations because they're not wasting lives through stupid orders, and then they're also much more effective in accomplishing the mission that they're given.
But so you speculate for a second. Is Putin waking up to the fact that, damn it, I don't have what I thought I had?
I think the question, what intelligence is he being fed?
Yeah. Well, he knows, our guys haven't moved more than, 3 kilometers west in the last, 5 months, and we've lost 100,000 lives. And
I mean, he's got, he thought that he'd have the country within 3 days, and he's realized 3 years later he doesn't have nearly,
right.
He's just has a fraction of the country.
So I think he knows. Now, his reasoning might be different than yours and my reasoning, for why it hasn't worked, Western obfuscation, weapons we give, things like that. But there's a difference between knowing that you have a problem and processing it and making decisions based on it. I think he's still, my guess is he thinks there's one more offensive, give it another year. I fully expect he's going to plan for, he's about to go do a mobilization. He's changing how the reserves are utilized. He's doing things so that he can do an offensive next summer.
Summer, is the war going to slow down for the winter?
Well, I think it does every winter.
Well, I'm just
it does every winter. But what I'd say is I don't think he's going to put his that he's going to really go hard unless something else happens. I don't think he's going to go all in on some kind of ceasefire, frozen conflict until he tries another offensive next year. I can't believe that he's not going to give it one more throw. And the problem with that is then the next year it's like, well, one more throw. But I think this would be a big year because now my guess is that they're doing $70,000 contracts, and those are expensive.
In other words, you get $70,000 if you enlist and risk your life, or maybe get yourself killed with your family.
And while the prisons may be empty now, when you go to court in Russia, you're of an age and a male. Your choices are you're heavily influenced to go in the army, or we're going to really drop the hammer on you in court. They're impressing, to use an old British term. They're impressing troops, And I think this is
I
all
mean,
to
when you say
avoid
uprising, off the streets,
off
or
the
what?
streets.
And in the European sectors, not just like
Well,
the
that's the
Central
thing. I
Asians,
think this is about avoiding a heavy draft in west of the Urals,
Well, yeah,
if he can help it.
So avoid a heavy draft of the Russian ethnic, of the European, and to bring in more from the Central Asia. This is an element of racism in this, right?
If he can, he's going to have, even in this next mobilization, if he's going to get 300,000 people of an age, then I think he's going to end up with with people from west of the Urals. There might be people desperate for money, or his families are desperate for money. But I'm hearing things. I don't know if you heard this too. You with me when I heard that the mean time of survival for a Russian soldier on the front's 30 days. So, and that's, I think, from when they begin their mobilization from initial training, it's 30 days. That means half of the soldiers are severely wounded or dead within 30 days. Now, the other half live. The average time is longer because they live, they go on. And so, I mean, there's a survival instinct that kicks in and they get it going. But that's a pretty tough number.
Yeah, I mean, he is taking care of a social problem in one respect. He's gotten rid of the prisoners, and it's a lot cheaper to kill them than to continue to feed them. But
right.
But I
don't tell this to Alabama.
But I do think, the question is, what would get him to stop, and why would he stop? And right now he's got this war he's advertised to his people about anti-fascism, anti-NATO, and he can turn that rhetoric up or down and maneuver it. So I think he'll do, if he does an offensive next year, it will fail because they don't know how to do it. They have the same problems the Ukrainians have in terms of planning and logistics. And but I don't think that'll stop him. He'll just change the rhetoric as, we took another 100 square meters and 100 square kilometers or whatever, and call it a great victory.
Are the Ukrainians still ahead of the Russians in terms of drone warfare, production, sophistication, all that?
The Ukrainians are much more dynamic in development. The Russians have much more scale and ability to mass that the Ukrainians don't have for various reasons. My understanding is the Russians have 8 different models they make, and they've scaled those models and they mass those models. The Ukrainians have over 1,000 drone companies, of which 60 some are done to some level of scale, but still that's a wide variety that requires different training and different logistics to support.
And a quick question about the level of support coming in from Tehran, from Pyongyang, and from Beijing. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah. I'll go on that. So first of all, they're definitely fighting 4 countries. I mean, we've said this a couple of times on this podcast.
They're fighting all the axis of aggressors.
They are fighting Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, probably in that order. Hard to say the last 2. I'd mix them up because, look, Russia's clearly, 1 million dead or severely wounded at this point. I mean, that's their primary fight. The North Koreans are interesting. They had soldiers in there. They were in Kursk. Not, I think they weren't necessarily in Ukraine proper. The 5 million, ammunition rounds had a value, right? That's a lot more than could produce in decades.
Yeah, they've got a defense industrial base that's pretty impressive.
They did. And the Russians, by the way, already had a lot of ammunition, so it's very beneficial to them. And the Iranians clearly provided the Shaheeds, and there's now a Shaheed factory, and it's doing real damage. But
the Chinese,
China is backstopping the war effort.
Uh-huh.
They are backstopping the Russian economy they did not exist, we wouldn't be bitching about India and Turkey because Russia's economy would have caused them to have to go to a ceasefire.
We're talking about buying oil, but we're also talking about various high-tech dual use
technologies coming back.
Yeah.
And very specific. Dual use technology is used as microelectronics for cruise and ballistic missiles that are the ones that get through. There's Chinese parts in the Shaheeds. The Chinese are in everything. Their imports and exports with Russia have increased nearly 40% over the last 3 years. They are the replacement for Europe and the limited U.S. withdrawal from the Russian economy. We weren't there much to begin with, but they could not fight this war without China's support. So let's be clear: they are fighting all 3, and they're paying China back. This recent reporting of giving Taiwan airborne assault tools, training, tactics training and procedures, and the actual tools to do it.
Tell me, Taiwan?
Yeah, so they've, China to
okay.
use against
To
Taiwan.
use against Taiwan, yeah.
And then, and rumors that they provided submarine quieting technology to China, which is a big deal. My point on this is that Ukraine's fighting all four of these. On occasion, Russia is fighting Ukraine, the United States, and Europe. We don't really get our act together the same way the axis of aggressors do, but certainly Ukraine is fighting China. Even if they won't say it out loud in Ukraine, they know it.
But to that end, I'd say, I mean, China's providing the oil revenue, which I think is critical to the Russian economy, and that should be stopped or reduce the, they work with the Middle East to reduce the price of oil. But a lot of the chips they're coming from China, but they're also coming from American companies and European companies. And we have these sanctions, but we don't enforce them. And there are a lot of smaller
They're
groups.
being sold directly to Russia or through somebody?
Indirectly, they're getting there. They dismantle Shaheeds and they find American microchips in there or other American parts, which if enforcement were much more stringent, that would slow down.
And it would be enforcement by Treasury Department?
And by Europeans.
And by Europeans.
And by other, partners. I mean, there's a lot of countries in the world that are throughputs. It can appear to us like a legitimate sale to a third country who then repackages it, a company in a third country repackages it and sells it. We should be more aggressively hunting these down and stopping them, just like we should be more aggressively. Like I get that we're not going to tariff Turkey and China at this point, particularly Turkey with what's going on in Gaza. But we sure as hell can do sanctions against Turkish companies that buy this fuel, this crude, and we can do it against Chinese and Indian companies. That's how you do it. I mean, I know the president loves tariffs, but not every tariffs are not always the right tool. The right tool for this is to hold the companies accountable. To tell the country,
so
China,
sanction the companies.
Sanction the companies. That's what we've done historically.
Yeah.
For these kind of bad actors. And look, it takes diligence. It's hard, but we have a guy, Matt Zweig here, knows exactly how to do it. There's lots of other guys, lots of other people in the government and in Congress who know how to do this. We should target them with sanctions. It's what Lindsey Graham was originally trying to do. I get that the president likes tariffs. That are not the right tool for this. The tool is to go after the company. That way that way you can still deal with Turkey over Hamas and Gaza. You can still deal with India, which we need to. And you can still deal even with China, which we need to.
There's $300 billion in Europe, a lot of it in Belgium, that's frozen Russian funds. There's been increasing talk about using that for reparations, using that for rearmament of Ukraine. I'm in favor of it all. There are some say, international law. I have to say it's an incredible thing that Russia can violate international law every single day by targeting civilians. And yet we've got to be so careful about that we can't, international law, but there's a way to do this, by the way, and the way to do it, Steve Rademacher, who's a very good lawyer and understands this stuff. He had a piece, I think, in the Washington Post the other day saying one way to do it is you essentially lend that money to Ukraine, that $300 billion, and you say Russia gets paid back after they provide reparations to Ukraine for the damage they've done, which won't be $300 billion, which will be about at least $1 trillion. And that's perfect. You can do, and as a lawyer, he says you can do that under international law. And I think you absolutely should.
Yeah. I mean, are you asking, are European bankers hypocritical? I'm going to say, I'll take that one for 100, Alex. So yes. Look, I agree with that. The theory is you loan 150, 160 billion you give it to Ukraine to buy weapons. They pay back that money once they begin to get reparations, which will well exceed 150 billion, and in fact are never going to occur.
Right.
And then the Belgians can feel a little better about themselves when they go to sleep at night. But they've got to get to yes on this.
Yeah. Because
in the end, the Europeans won't give up the money. I mean, what Europe and U.S. did together over 2 years was about $120 billion worth of arms transfers. That's going to be needed again, even if there's a ceasefire. I mean, that's what we got to recognize here. We have to build the Ukrainian military through the ceasefire. And all this stuff they have has got to go into life cycle maintenance. Without getting into the details, I'll just tell you that's expensive. F-16s, Abrams tanks, 777 and 109 howitzers, NASAMS, and Patriot air defense systems. I just described 6 of the most expensive non-maritime things that you have life cycle maintenance on in the American military. That cost money. All this money's got to be flowed to Ukraine. If you're going to flow this money to Ukraine, it's got to, and it's Europe only. They're going to need this. Because the European, especially once there's a ceasefire, the Europeans are going to get, everyone's wallets are going to tighten, and except the Eastern European ones won't, but they're the smallest wallets. All the big wallets will tighten in Western Europe. So we've got to have this set up ahead of time so that we can transition right and go. Yep, the loans still come from there. We'll all be okay, and that's what we need because it's going to still cost $30 billion a year to rearm Ukraine in a ceasefire, year over year. Because Putin is going to come back. If we frozen conflict this thing along the current line of contact, his plan will be to come back. Whether he can or can't is a different issue, but his plan will be to come back.
Okay. And in terms of the weapons, right now, all the chatter that I'm hearing in D.C. is over Tomahawks. I know, because I know you have strong opinions on this. We've talked about this a little bit, but I want to broadcast your opinions a little bit. It's important. It's important to let you go ahead and talk about what's good about Tomahawks and what's better, because you made me learn a little bit about this.
I'm not opposed to transferring Tomahawk. I love Tomahawk. I fired hundreds of them. I validate the weapon.
They're lovely
every 2 years or so throughout my military career. Good weapon, especially when you own the ability to do the targeting, the intelligence, the targeting, and the programming of the weapon. This is a hard weapon to transfer. Transferring it to Japan has taken us a half a decade.
Wow.
And they're still just now beginning the testing part of it, the firing part of it. So first of all, you would need to understand how you're doing the target. The Russians are starting to sniff around this and go, hey, are Americans going to be targeting, sitting there with Ukrainians, picking out target sets, and then planning the attack? And you're not part of this war? I mean, these are good questions. Are we going to give them the whammy dime? All the kind of things that make a Tomahawk survivable. If you do, you compromise it with the Russians and therefore the Chinese. If you don't, the weapons don't get through because the Russians have pretty good point defense, SA-22, so they have systems that that could do some damage, and they're expensive.
Yeah.
So politically, I'm for the Tomahawk.
Right.
But I would say the Tomahawk and the and would be the kitchen sink of operational level, kind of mid-range cost and position strike weapons. ATACMS missiles, which are the ground-based missile that can go 300 to 400 kilometers.
Not as far as Tomahawk, but far enough to do some damage.
And what you do is you do it against the Russian logistics, command and control, air bases anywhere in that range, stretch their lines. As Andy said, this is not a world-class logistics army. It is a crap logistics army. And if the Russians think it's hard to fight 30 kilometers from the front lines, try fighting with your logistics 300 to 400 kilometers from the front lines. Then I would, and by the way, we're getting out of the ATACMS business. Our army's transitioning. Yeah. This is the perfect presidential drawdown authority weapon, right out of U.S. stocks, 500 or 1,000 of them. No limitations. You can use them against any target in their range, which isn't Moscow.
And let me just make sure people understand what you're saying here. ATACMS are a weapon we've been using. We're going to move to a more advanced weapon. So the stocks we have of them, we can sell them. It's like, and then
the army takes the money to buy new ones. And by the way, there are new things called precision strike missile. And just to really complete the circle, it's a Tomahawk.
Is it really?
Yes. And so
exactly the same, or cheaper, simpler?
Well, there's never cheaper in the U.S. Defense Industrial Base. And it's really not simpler. I mean, it's fired from a ground vehicle instead of from a ship.
I see.
Or a submarine, but it's basically now there's various versions of the precision strike missile. Another one's an SM-6, another Navy missile, and the third one's going to be some hypersonic thing the Army's designing. But for the foreseeable future, it's Tomahawk. Okay. In addition, there's this new weapon called the Extended Range Attack Munition, one that General Corcoran, who also works with Andy and me at Ukraine Freedom Fund, and I have been advocating for. It is, Cliff. It is the U.S. Defense Industrial Base, hitting for the cycle. We literally 2.5 years ago, began to ask for this weapon, a low-cost, longer range cruise missile that could be launched from the MiGs or the Sukhois and eventually now the F-16s that they have, that can really impose that same kind of logistics, command and control, stretching the battlefield for the Russians' weapon. And, normally the U.S. Defense Industrial Base will see in 6 years with a plan. No, we now have missiles ready for delivery 2 years later. It's done by two typical defense industrial base companies that have delivered competing versions of this, which the Air Force or the U.S. military is going to provide to the Ukrainians with European money, financing it up to, I think, 3,300 have been approved. They'll distribute, eventually be like 100 a month, over a couple years. That is some bang. That's some, punch in the giddy up of the Ukrainian Air Force to apply cost onto the Russians. So ATACMS plus the ERAM, to me, that's the secret sauce. Look, do I think Tomahawk would have unique value because it's really long range? Yes. But in the meantime, they can use some of their own. They can then concentrate. If we give them these two things, they can concentrate their long range strike on the really 1,500 to 2,000 kilometer strikes that they've been experimenting with against refineries and such. So I'm excited. It's Tomahawk and
how effective has been the attacks on refineries, on oil? I mean, I've seen online, huge lineups of cars in Russia just to get gas. Now, again, that's not the kind of pain that the Ukrainians are feeling when their hospitals and kindergartens are being hit. And it's not going to make a revolution over that, but that is
it's having direct impact. I mean, the Ukrainians are doing a better job about following the laws of war, and they're not hitting the hospitals in Russia.
Right.
But we were at the front line a couple of weeks ago, and at the operational level, the gas shortage is impacting Russian operations so that their military motor vehicles are operating less at the front line, and so it is definitely impacting not just the average Russian consumer, but it's impacting the military operations. And so, the more they can continue hitting the infrastructure and the logistics hubs, the more they can keep the Russians from doing much.
So you've heard numbers. I'd be careful though. You hear numbers like they've hit 39% of refineries. Yeah. So hit. Yes. Out of commission permanently, no. Some have recovered. Some haven't been full kills on that because some numbers down. But Andy's right. The two things have happened. One, these are refineries that process Russian crude to Russian refined for domestic use or for export. So now they're really exporting mostly crude, which they get less money for than a refined product or processed product. And then they don't have it for the lines at the gas station you saw, but even more importantly, I think, for what Andy draws attention to, which is their ability to fight, use the motor vehicles. So yes, it's having an impact, and they could do more of it. And the beauty is if they really do hit the cracker, the center piece of the refinery, that's a hard fix. And that's why the Russians are defending the hell out of these things. So if you fired a Tomahawk on them, I'm not 100% sure to get through. But these are longer range, 1,500, 2,000 kilometer strikes that couldn't be done by the weapon systems I mentioned, but could be done by Tomahawk or by indigenous Ukrainian production.
Is the American military learning useful lessons from this war?
Not as much as they could be. There are people over there who are learning, and there are lessons that people think should be learned, but they're not. I mean, a lot of the drones are very rudimentary, and the way they're being used.
Well, we should be doing the most high-tech drones in the world right now, right?
But at a much lower cost than we are.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's
but we should be doing anyhow.
And we should be looking at counter drones because we'll go into other countries who will have the same cheap drones that the Ukrainians have, and then we'll have to counter them. So we need to know how to fight against them.
Right.
But we don't have enough active duty people. There's a huge limit on active duty people. The lessons learned are probably not being disseminated. The ones that can be learned. Yeah.
I agree completely with Andy that we have a very low number. The number probably is supposed to be zero. It's not zero. It's much lower than it should be. So, which means it's hard. What are those people's missions? They're usually there for some kind of supply chain logistics support, for some kind of let me see if this thing we're doing is effective or not. Not for learning about the battlefield, but for learning about how the U.S. supports things. There's a handful. I'm sure the special forces, they always dominate these things. They got some people doing things. But the reality is we're not learning a lot. Here we have a partner using broadly our weapon systems in combat, and we're aggressively trying not to know what happened. You can't make this up. I tell you who's not there, General. I hate to say it, everyone can help in the military, but usually it takes a general officer having a eureka moment to really get things moving. And we have no active duty general officer eureka moments in Ukraine, and that's a mistake. Also, I just feel that that we're not following up with like I mentioned, that life cycle maintenance. If we were really helping them, we'd have all these guys on the ground learning how things break down in combat, learning why the NASAMS isn't working against certain weapon systems, because you'd be in there helping them tweak the systems. I think we have contractors, former U.S. military who work for a prime, a defense industrial base company, or a third-party contractor for the prime. But that's not the same. And so these are lost opportunities.
There's also, like, we bring over the UFF, we bring over retired flag officers like Monty and Corky and about six, seven others. We come over to help train the Ukrainian officers. And yeah, I can see the issue because we have to do everything through translation. Flag, rank Ukrainians don't speak English. Ihor Voronchenko, his English is not great, and he's better than most others. And you can see the disconnect when the active duty come in and meet with the Ukrainian counterparts. The breakdown in communication is just severe, and I've seen translators, official translators, who get the numbers that 300,000 gets translated as 30. That can screw up planning. But the Ukrainians also have a cultural attribute. They want to look good to their counterparts. They don't want to say, hey, we have this problem, we have this weakness, can you help us? They want to say, we've got it under control. The Americans here, he said the word mission command, he said center of gravity. He really had no idea what he was saying, but he knew the buzzword. And so the Americans walk away thinking it's all good, when there's really a lot of weaknesses that they've not identified.
When Putin claims that the reason among the reasons he's attacked Ukraine is because Ukraine was on the cusp of joining NATO, which is an offensive alliance that threatened him. Now, that's all nonsense. But one part of it that I think is very clear, Ukraine could not have gotten into NATO because countries such as Hungary and Turkey wouldn't have voted for it, and you need unanimity to join NATO. So that is so easily debunked, even if you think whatever you think of NATO. And again, NATO is a defensive alliance and all that. But and answer this any way you want. In the current moment, I can think of no nation that would contribute more to the collective defense of NATO than Ukraine, because they know what they're doing, because they're fighting, because they're willing to fight, because they care about it. I mean, would I rather be in a foxhole with a Ukrainian or a member of the Spanish military at this point?
Because, the Ukrainians are very good at fighting the Russians, and I think
most
NATO countries, I'll say the U.S. for sure, would blow the Russians away. I mean, it's like if the United States is the pros, Russia's a good high school team.
But I just should say, because they have nukes, and then people worry, okay, he'll use the nukes when he's crazy, this Putin.
Well, it's true, but I think with the reason people want to join NATO is because of Russia. If Russia were not who they are, Finland, Sweden, Ukraine, the Baltics, NATO wouldn't need to exist.
That's right.
It only exists because of Putin and who he is and the culture he represents.
And for a long time, a lot of Europeans didn't understand who he was, and a lot of Americans didn't understand too, to be fair about it. I mean, we had H.R. McMaster on this podcast last week, and he was saying, as early as 2004, we should have seen who Putin was, because when he poisoned a candidate for, I forget his name now.
President Yushchenko.
President Yushchenko. That's right. That's right. Yeah. And disfigured him permanently. He says, that's the point at which you should have said, okay, this is a bad guy. This is not going to be our friend. 2004, 4 years before, he took Abkhazia and South Ossetia away from Georgia, and a few years before, the Crimea. And we had presidents who didn't, we reset with Russia. What kind of reset with Russia? What are you thinking about if you understand who this guy is? They don't want to be your friend.
But I think the Ukrainians have come to the conclusion, and I would agree with them, that Putin is not the problem. Putin is just the indicative of the problem Russia has with Ukraine. There's a cultural issue that goes on that, you can trace back to the Mongols, and the way Mongols, not to digress too far, but
No,
the
but it's-
Mongol leadership was who's ever in charge of Russia, your job is not to lead the Russian nation. Your job is to screw every Russian you can out of all the money you need to give us. So Russian leadership culture is about suppressing the populace in order to extract as much wealth as possible, now for yourself or previously for Mongol overlords. And I think that's a culture that still remains somewhat
And it's, by the
dominant.
way, that you've described, I think, effectively the ideology of what you might call Duginism. Alexander Dugin, who says we're Eurasian people, what he means is we're Mongols, we should be proud of it, which is interesting because when I went to school in Russia, everyone was kind of, they wanted to think they're Europeans more than Asians. It was kind of, they were kind of ashamed of the fact that they were dominated by Mongols for 250 years. Other Europeans weren't. We're as European as anybody. What was, Petersburg.
Thank you, Peter the Great.
Peter, thank you, Peter the Great. We're going Western, right? And who was who were the architects? Leningrad, which is, I think of it because that's sort of it, or Petersburg, beautiful architecture, Italian architects, right? There was very clearly, okay.
So I do think this is a problem that the U.S. suffers, right? We've been, we were way too late to the China threat. I mean, 2008, 2010, the U.S. military started to see the problem. 2020, before our State Department and Treasury Department really come around.
Thanks to Matt Pottinger, who chairs our Asia program, I should say. Yeah,
I don't think he ever got Commerce to come around. But my point on this is that we are.
Okay.
Look, we're a democracy. We're an international country. We try to deal internationally with countries. We're a global leader. So you want to see the best in somebody. You want to think you can talk them into the right answer. And it took us 10 years, from 2004 to 2014, to really see who Russia was. And even then, our response was weak in 2014.
Right.
It took us from 2008 to 2020 on China. We shouldn't. I mean, this is I don't want to say it's a weakness in democracy. It's a weakness. It's a challenge that democracies have to overcome, which is your desire to not actually enter into a conflict. Your desire to look for the path of to peace. Unfortunately, if it leads to a failure to deter, and that's what happened in 2014 and 2022. Putin did not feel deterred by the West, and he took action.
My last question for today, just because it's on my mind, because I was talking to Ivana Strader here at FDD about this. When you're in Ukraine, you're looking to Europe, you're thinking, who are my friends and who are not? Tell me a little bit about that. My guess is you just think the Baltic countries, Finland, they're in my corner for sure. Do they not feel betrayed by Serbia, by Slovenia, by Hungary at this point? Can you say how they, when you have a few drinks with them, do they say those damn Hungarians?
Yeah, no, I would say that the Hungarians, I mean, they recognize that some countries are more supportive than others. The Baltics are very supportive.
Yeah, well, they're next on the
Poles are supportive militarily, but trying to cross the Polish-Ukrainian border can always be problematic because of grain quotas, et cetera, which is nerve-wracking. And then Hungary, and Hungary does have a small border with Ukraine, and there's always, if it's Russian misinformation or Hungarian operations that give the Hungarians back a little bit more of Ukraine that was given to Ukraine at some previous border split.
Sure.
So I think they do a pretty good job of recognizing people for being generous and not going overly critical on those who are less than generous.
Okay. All right. Any final points you want to make?
I'd like to make one. So, I'm here with Andy. He's, I've spoken now 4 or 5 times about trips to Ukraine.
Yeah.
He runs the Ukrainian Freedom Fund. It's worthy. I think, our donor base, the people who listen to and think of the same way FTD does, should take a look at them and try to support them. I think they're at ukrfreedomfund.org, right?
You can go to theuff.org and see everything about us, see how to donate to us. We do, everything is privately funded. Every time we do a course, we have retired U.S. officers going over there, helping with training and education. And we tell them we are not U.S. government funded. We do not represent the policy of the U.S. government, but we do represent what we think is the will of the vast majority of Americans. And that alone means a lot to them. And then to be able to give them skills and education that they then see how to do things much more effectively the Western way, they're very grateful for it. So,
And you do some demining work. And
we're involved with demining. We're involved with equipment. We're involved with a lot of education at the strategic level, and we have relationships with Kyiv Polytechnic University, Kyiv Mogila University, Dragomanova University you were speaking at the other day, Shevchenko University. So in all the military academies. So a lot of what we're doing is trying to change the mindset in terms of how they think about national security and basic organizational transparency.
look more like the West and less like the Soviet Union,
Right.
which is going to be critical for the day when they do join European security
Got it.
cooperation or something like NATO. So I just want to give a big shout out to Andy and his team, and I think that they are consistent, and I'm proud to go work for them pro bono, as all general officers do for him. But it's great work, and so I hope in general, they get the kind of funding they need.
No, thanks, sir.
Important and admirable. Colonel Bain, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Monty, as always.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you who have been with us for this conversation here today on Foreign